I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted. But in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist. But they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning. But I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. Oh, man, I can't wait for that little idiot to finally show up. Oh, here he comes. Oh, hello. Oh, look, you've invited yourself into my house again. But this time, I'm going to make money off you. That's right. I am going to make this into a coffee shop. So from now on, every time you come over, you have to buy coffee. If you stop drinking coffee, you don't get to stay here, and I'm not going to keep reading to you. So you need to maintain a steady coffee intake in order to stay here. What would you like? Would you like an espresso? Because I could do that for you. I'll do that for you right now. It's going to take a few minutes to squeeze out the coffee from these grounds that I keep in my freezer. But in the meantime, welcome to the Glenn Reads Gothic Horror to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week we're going to finish reading Ringstones by Sarban. Want to learn a little bit about the author? I hope so. I took the time to steal this from Wikipedia. John William Wall. Hold on. Let me get the milk steaming while I read this part. John William Wall was born the 6th of November, 1910, and died 11th of April, 1989. John William Wall, whose pen name was Sarban, was a British writer and diplomat. Wall's diplomatic career lasted more than 30 years, but his writing career as Sarban was brief and not prolific, ending during the early 1950s. Sarban is described in the Encyclopedia Fantasy as a subtle, literate teller of tales, conscious of the darker and less acceptable implications that underlie much popular literature. Wall cited the supernatural fiction of Arthur Machen and Walter de la Mare as influences of his work. You want to hear some fun facts I stole from a Wix site? Called JaminaMontero.wixsite.com. 10 things you probably did not know about Gothic literature. Gothic novels have been scaring us for 250 years. I don't know if I've read this already from the last time I recorded an episode. There we go. All done. That'll be $9. That's right. I said $9. Well, I gotta finish this part of the milk, but you better get your money out. I accept Apple Pay. Not the Google one, though. John Polidori wrote The Vampire, the first vampire story to be written in English. The novel introduces the Byronic hero to Gothic. He is the attractive, dangerous outsider whose struggles with melancholy will feature in numerous classics of the genre. On publication, The Vampire is is incorrectly attributed to Byron instead of Polidori, to the annoyance of both writers. But the novel is a success and sparks a craze for similar vampire tales. You got your money? Yeah, take your phone out. I'm sure your parents put a card on your phone for emergencies. Go ahead, just scan it. Nope, not accepted. Try it again. Nope, not accepted. Okay, well, we'll figure this out downstairs in the library. That's the grandfather clock telling me to shut up and to move this forward. So why don't we go downstairs and finish reading this book? Well, there you go. Why don't you get yourself settled there with your coffee. I hope you enjoy it. I only recently learned how to make it by following the instructions that came with the machine I bought. I'm hoping that if I can get about 10 espressos out of you, I can pay this thing off. And then after that, it's nothing but profit. No overhead. Part 2, Chapter 2. I tried to finish my night's rest in the bus, but it was a gesture, a bit of a pitiful human defiance of the pitiless mechanical gods, and nothing more. It is perfectly logical, I suppose, that the more and bigger machines there are, the less room there is on this earth for human beings. Well, that's well put. It's very insightful. But I do sometimes mildly wonder, why is it that, although roads grow monthly wider and motor vehicles more enormous, through the noun luxury is applied as a matter, of course, to the substantive coach. All the technical skill of the modern factory, backed presumably by centuries of experience in making things to measure for the human frame, has not succeeded in producing a bus where the leg space is not 1 inch shorter than the average human femur. And that the seat space is just about the same amount too narrow to accommodate 2 average human pelvises. Yes! Come on, go off! Place side by side. Oh man, I wish this guy had never been on a plane. Oh, he'd have a lot of things to say about being on a plane. Before Piers and I reached Staines Head, and the correct interpretation of the term luxury had occurred to me, the adjective implies, of course, sumptuousness and opulence of appearance. Those tall-backed seats with curving lines, that wealth of plush and imitation leather, those chromium-plated knobs and ashtrays, such magnificence of upholstery, such generous filling of the available space with solid furnishings is indeed luxurious, but it has to be admired from the outside. A little further development, and we shall have reached the point of perfection in buses. The point where the intricacies unto which passengers now insinuate themselves are no longer available to harbor such intruders, but filled, they too, with luxurious appointments. Boy, is this guy going to be disappointed before he dies if he ever looked into a bus, because buses didn't get any better. It's pretty terrifying. Piers, who was pondering other matters, did not treat these reflections very sympathetically. He ascribed them merely to my having been levered out of bed 3 hours before my usual time and promised me leg stretching enough before the day was out. Oh, he paid just enough attention to my argument to demolish it by pointing out that if space on my own showing was a valuable commodity to me, it was no less so the bus company, that we had as much of it as the price of our tickets entitled us into expensive times. Then he dismissed the subject for the more important one of Daphne Hazel's story. All the same, he was glad as I was to get out of Staines Head, and I believe that he was been there once before. At any rate, he wasted no time casting about for our way to, but set off down the main street and across the bridge over the Nither and up a twisting lane or two of the edge of town before he bothered to open the map. From that point, where we mounted a stone stile and took a path up the rough pasture towards Nither's edge, we all had the space we decided. I could never get among these hills of the north without their reaffirming my hold on an old conviction, that space and silence are the most precious and least valued gifts left to us. In this crowded age, from the heritage of an ampler world, I mourn man's unhappy compulsion to fill them at all costs with whatever rubbish comes handiest. Well, he never got to see TikTok, so he doesn't really understand what he's talking about. I console myself with the reflection that so far as the rape of space goes, but it's a late stage of a process that began with the first axe and the first plow. After the plow, the enclosures. After the wholesale conscription of open field and common to the use of more economic exploitation, the ruthless trimming that pares away the lovely but uneconomic margins of our country lanes and roots the extravagance of hedgerows. The rough and reedy pastures that slope up to Nither Edge and the open moor beyond it still represent a bit of the old, casual, almost incidental way of exploiting land. As we climbed the wide and lonely hill, looking up to a tumbled embattlements of the dark gray boulders, aloof and hard against the summer sky, I greeted the freedom of the hill with something of reverence and compassion. As Caesar, one hopes, may have returned the salutation of those about to die, the next time I go that way, if I ever go again, I shall find Ringstones Moor turned into a plantation of pit props or a tank training area. We stopped to rest on the edge, perching ourselves on one of the great rounded slabs of millstone grit with all the quiet Nether Valley, a sober tartan of green fields intersected by black stone dikes at our feet and tangled undulating brown, green, and gray plain of the moor at our backs, Piers pored over a map. With his usual luck, which he calls skill, that was snarky, he had hit the right footpath out of Stein's Head, and it was evidently little used. And I thought little of our chances of being able to keep it all the way across the moor of Ringstones, but there was not much fear of our getting lost. With a good map, a compass, which Piers usually carries with him out of his expeditions, and a clear day, we might find ourselves toiling over some rough ground. But it was improbable that we should miss the haul altogether. Well, as it happened, we lost the path a good many times, for it melted away every so often into a wide patch of heather or an expanse of quaking bog, and more than once eluded us in a maze of brown hillocks and holes. Some of these places were exceedingly difficult to get across dry shod, and as usual, after a time, I got tired of tussock jumping, and we splodged through. Is splodged a word? I'm looking it up. It is. It's another term for splotch. All right. Though with the inevitable result that soon I misjudged the depth of one spongy bit and went well over the knees into the bog. And when I caught up with Piers, I found him, standing, looking back at the track that we had just picked our way through. It was a broad depression in the moor, most of it bare of heather. Between the brown pools and pallid mosses, the ground was naked peat, frosted, as it were, with some kind of salty extrusion. And there was a few bleached heather roots writhed up out of the peat like twisted skeleton hands. Even under a sunny sky, it was one of the loneliest-looking bits of moor I had ever set my eyes on. Piers remarked that this must be the place. Well, there was very little seen in me to identify it with any particular place. It was just a bit left over from the raw material of creation. But then, recollecting that he was making the assumption that Daphne Hazel's story was some kind of truth, I saw what he meant. I looked around and imagined myself alone there on a cloudy gray day. I should not have liked to be there alone. I wonder why we call a moor dreary. It seems a little descriptive of the true character of such a region as calling a tiger, quote, undomesticated, unquote. Oh, 4 people highlighted this. Dreariness is a human product. If I were looking for real dreariness, I should go for a tour around the outskirts of Leeds, or Manchester, or Sheffield, where clinkery drabness falls with such a weight it would knock holes in the bottom of your soul. Oh, there's no comparison between the wasteland and the lonely mountain. There is power in the emptiness of the hills, and it's a hostile power. Okay, apparently people really like that quote. One old tin can lying on the ground would have made all the difference, but there was no tin can. What we could see was all so powerfully unhuman as to be able to erase our knowledge of its narrow limits. 4 people highlighted this. What existed was what we saw, and it was the same old menacing wilderness through which the Paleolithic hunter stumbled with backwards glances at pursuing shadows, cold, hunger, and death. Why are people highlighting this? And why are there 4 people that care about that line? Who are these people that do this on a Kindle? I don't highlight crap. What am I going to do? Go back and reread it? By flipping through the Kindle's interface? I agreed with Piers. Oh, it might well have been the very place where Daphne Hazel lost her way. I held my soaked trousers from my legs and conceded that I might well have found the same bog hole. I noticed that Piers looked carefully about him on the ground as we moved on again, and once he stopped to stare at some faint marks on a patch of bare soil, I imagine he thought he had found a footprint, huh? But Chingachgook? Is this a word, and how do you pronounce it? God, don't be racist. Please don't be racist. There's nothing in the dictionary about that. I don't know what that word is, and if it's racist, I apologize. And his son, Uncas, together, Verp with leather stocking to help them, couldn't have said whether it was one or not. I told him so. Piers said nothing, burp, and we carried on. We found the path again after a while, or at least the path. It seemed to run in the general direction that we wanted, and so we followed it, winding and twisting through the heather, over the waves of the moor. We came after some time to a little runlet of water flowing away to our left, which must undoubtedly run into the Ringstones' beck. And then, as we topped a low rise beyond this, Piers stopped and pointed, less than half a mile ahead, and somewhat to the right of our line of march was a round area, higher than the surrounding moor, and plainly to be distinguished for being clothed with grass, while all around it was heather. And, more conspicuous still, scattered about that green patch stood a number of great, dark, upright stones. Piers studied the map and cast his eyes all around. Checking our position, I complimented him on his navigation. There before us was the very stone circle indicated by Gothic lettering on the ordnance map. We made straight for it, and soon we were sitting side by side on a large flat oblong stone lying within the circle. Oh, I pointed out the dip and the ridge which formed our eastern horizon, and remarked that Daphne's description was sufficiently accurate. Piers jumped up. Yes, I agreed. This must be the altar stone itself, but I shouldn't have had any scruples about resting your hinder end on it. The sheep seemed to have treated it with less delicacy than an old man what's-his-name. I did my best to recall the description of the place and Daphne's story, and as I did so, recollected one particular that at once seemed to me to prove that she could not have seen this place with her own eyes. I mentioned it to Piers, but he thought I was referring to the clearing of the heather from the stone circle to the end of Ringstone's private road. Of that, of course, there was no trace, and Piers began to explain what he meant by imaginative and objective truth. No, said I. I'm thinking only of the grass here in the circle. Doesn't she write that it was smooth or close-cropped? Well, it's as rough and as tussocky as any old bit of moorland. I should say that she had the description of the place from the old fellow who told her what it was like when he was a boy, perhaps. And then the place was kept tidy. Piers shook his head, and I don't know whether he thought my suggestion was sensible or not. We strolled together to the ridge, the edge of the circle, to the side toward the hollow where Ringstone's Hall ought to lie, and from there you scarcely perceived that there was a valley between the moor and the stone circle stands and the hill beyond. I noticed the bridle road from Blag Hill across the moor to our right, and saw where it dipped out of sight in front of us. Well, we picked our way across from the stone circle by a very faint and uncertain path and turned down the bridle road, which showed very little sign of use, and then, quite suddenly, saw the faint hill far away before us to a steep-sided little valley. It was a surprising view, a deep cup in the moor, green and wooded, an open space of parkland in the middle, and toward the southern side, a stone house and outbuildings. Oh, well, we stopped and looked down, and there seemed to be no one about. The only moving things were some cattle in the park. Well, I asked Piers, what's your plan of campaign now that we got here? Why, said he, what's wrong with ringing the bell and asking to see Miss Hazel? Nout, that's N-O-W-T, nout at all, said I. If we're lucky, Dr. Ravlin's old world courtesy may extend to us asking to a luncheon. It could hardly be extended to us asking to see a friend anyway, said Piers. So down the hill we went, and I quite forgot about the time to look out for the traces of Dr. Ravlin's earthworks besides that rough, narrow lane. But as I remember the hillside now, oh, so rough, so overgrown with bracken, ling, and scrubby little thorn bushes, and tufts of young birches. I doubt whether I should have succeeded in seeing any prehistoric embankment there as though I had remembered and searched and stared all day. As we approached the level ground of the park, it became obvious that Daphne Hazel had exercised to the full of the artist's privilege of improving on nature. Like any new recruit to an order, perhaps, she had been quicker to learn its privileges than its duties. In the first place, the park was a good deal smaller than her story had led me to imagine. Secondly, it was nothing so trim and cared for as I had pictured it. In fact, it was a sadly neglected little wilderness. Half the great trees were down, the shrubberies were scrubbed, and the open lawns were unattended. Rough, with weeds and rushes and poached by the hooves of the red bullocks that turned their heads to follow us with slow stares as we passed. And near the bottom of the hill, a tumble-down stone dike, which had once no doubt been the park boundary wall, was sketchily mended with posts and wire, which were also strung across the road to keep the cattle from straying. We straddled over, went across the park proper toward the house, and halfway across, we set up a covey of partridges from the rough grass by the side of the drive. Once down the hill, you cannot see the hall itself until you're almost upon it. The trees, having been so planted and the drive so unwindingly traced as to give the impression that the park is bigger than it really is, neither of us spoke as we drew near it. We were both busy looking about us, and I, for one, was busy also adjusting my mind to the new situation, both curious and comic. Its drawing suspicions derived from the observations I had already made about the place told me we were going to meet in a few minutes, and I don't know what Piers was thinking just then. From the intentness of his expression, he might have been expecting Daphne Hazel to burst from the bushes any moment with all the hounds of Elfland in pursuit. Then we came out round the belt of beech trees, and this is such a long description of them walking to the house. Speed it up a little bit. We don't need to know. We get it. The place is run down. We get it. We've heard this. You've said it like 9 times. Before the terrace of the hall, we stood there quite a long time. The first glance at the hall was enough, but I continued looking at it because I dared not look at Piers. When at length I did, I had to sit down on the stump of a tree to let my sense of humor have its way. I've never seen such a picture of crestfallen bewilderment as he presented. But he saw the funny side of it himself after a while and sat down beside me, and laughed. Yeah. It was Ringstones Hall, all right. I hadn't the slightest doubt about that, but the place hadn't been lived in for a generation. The chimney pots were gone. Many a slab had slid from the roof, the shutters having rotten from their hinges in front of the windows. Grass and weeds grew in the cracks of the steps, and the tall red docks lifted their heads as high as the ground floor windowsills. The house was not quite a ruin, but it was in the last stage of dilapidation and decay, deserted, mournful, pitiful as only an abandoned house can look. We went up the steps and across the terrace. The front door was half open, and it sagged on its hinges, and by the accumulation of soil at its foot, many a long year had passed since it was last shut. We went inside, into a stone-flagged hall, looked about us. Our entry disturbed a number of jackdaws in the upper story, and their loud alarm cries echoed hollowly through the house. We heard them fluttering and scrabbling about the roof and setting up an indignant clamor as they wheeled about the place outside. The entrance hall smelt of damp and mold. From the marks on the walls, it looked as if they had once been paneled, but now they were stripped and bare stone was streaked by weather. Only the lowest stair remained. All the others, with supports and balusters too, had been ripped out, and the landing that hung inaccessible above was devoid of woodwork. Oh, that's a shame. And we wandered into the other ground floor rooms. All were alike, stripped and empty, doors, paneling, almost every scrap of woodwork gone. The plaster had fallen from the ceilings, and the fireplaces were choked with twigs and rubbish. Well, it had been a good old house. We admired it even in its decay. Well-built place with room to move about. With a little imaginative reconstruction, I could see it might have been a century ago, a sober, dignified, solid place wearing an air of having been there a long, long time. Well, said Piers slowly, when we came out onto the terrace again. Let's go and have a look at the stables. But we went round to the end of the house. Oh, my God, we're just going to sit here and talk about how everything's decaying. We went around to the end of the house and pushed our way between 2 broad, high yew hedges, which had once bounded a short drive, but now clearly blocked it. Then down a flagged path, all but grassed over to a square buildings in much the same state of neglect as the hall. One side of the double carriage gate was missing, and we went through into the yard. Every flag of pavement was outlined by a little hedge of grass, and weeds and stones themselves were green moss. Piers walked over to a stone, that stood at the middle of the yard, and beside it an iron pump, red with rust. The spout of the pump was missing. We get it, everything's decayed. I get it. The handle lay on the flags. It ended, I observed, as some sort of scroll ornament, half rusted away. Most of the doorways around the yard gaped open, and I wandered around and poked my head into a few of them. All were empty and smelled damply of long disuse. The roofs of some of the places had fallen in, but on the ridge of the block facing the gates were still the remnants of a wooden lantern and a bit of ironwork on the top, which had once perhaps been the weather pane, and I paused and took a tour of the yard of the corner to fill my pipe. Looking idly into a bigger place with a smaller doorway that had been the coach house, I stepped inside to strike a match, and with half an eye I intended to light my tobacco, and I noticed that the place still contained some smoldering vehicle, rubberish, and leaning against the walls, while odds and ends of rotting leather and harness bits of old iron on the floor. There seemed to be some sort of old fireplace on the sides. Piers, who had followed me, had gone further into the place and poked about the rubbish in the light of my own match lesson. 2 things at any rate, I said, and as we walked back to the hall again, emerged from the reconnaissance. One is that we shall have to be content with our sandwiches for lunch. Yes. And the other is that we shall have to look elsewhere for your friend. Do you want to explore this place anymore, or shall we have a shot at getting to Blag Hill before the pub shuts? Well, he shook his head. He seemed quite satisfied, and in fact wore an air now of having expected the place to be like that. There isn't a pub at Blag Hill, he said. At least there's none marked on the map. He pulled the map out and thought for a time. I was a little puzzled by his manner then, but supposed that he was working out a new theory to account for Daphne Hazel's story in the light of our discovery. I myself couldn't see what the problem was. He could possibly find now in Daphne's bit of fiction, but of course, we looked at the thing from different points of view. The quickest way back to Stein's Head, he said, would be to strike straight over this hill and drop down into the road on the other side. We go to Blag Hill and trust to getting a bus, but I don't know how they run. And the main thing now is to find Daphne as soon as we can. Damn it, said I. We're out for a walk. Not, mark you, that I don't think it would be quicker to stick for the footpath rather than take one of your shortcuts, but I'm convinced of the urgency anyway. We crossed the park, Piers pointing out with a rather defensive air as we approached a stream on the other side that you could, with a little imagination, discern a kind of circular drive or track around the level space. We crossed the beck on the rocks and pushed through the marshy thickets of birch and willow on the other side, then tackled the steep hill. Once we got through the closed and cobwebby plantations of the conifers, we stopped, sweating freely, trying to bring a trickle of water from our sandwiches, and after the toiling up some of the more, the sheep paths were not much use as they were ran horizontally, and we lugged ourselves slowly upwards into the broken bracket until we finally reached the saddle and the ridge, from which stone circle I would say ridge is a broad and more or less level mountaintop, and of course there was a bog and a moss, and it was very slow progress we made, and we kept advancing in a general easterly direction, bearing, if anything, away from our left, and it took us nearly as long to get over that hill as it had done to come from Steinhills and Ringstones by path. But, of course, it didn't have to be dreamed of to go back the same way we had came, when, in the end, we got down on the other side and squelched in our sodden boots. Upon the metalled road, we made up for lost time and did a steady march of 4 miles to an hour all the way to Stein's Head. The bus for Blag Hill overtook us just as we came to the first houses of Stein's Head. Pierce's idea was to go to the post office and begin his inquiries after Miss Hazel there. I agreed, but persuaded him to call at the principal pub at the place, the White Bear, and if we could go do something about our night's lodging. To my surprise, but not all of his, they made no difficulty about giving us a room at a moderate price. We asked the landlady if she knew anything about Miss Hazel, but drew blank. However, she directed us to the post office. I was wondering whether I dare propose to Piers that the investigation be postponed until we had had some tea. When our quest ended before it all began, Stein's Head is not a big place, but still the encounter was a stroke of luck. Halfway down the main street, Piers suddenly exclaimed, "Hello!" and darted off to the other side of the road. There, looking into a general store window, was a tall, fair-haired girl in a belted green frock. Bareheaded, bare-armed, with a little boy holding one of her hands and industriously kicking out the toe of his shoe against the stones of the shop front. Piers and the girl had already greeted one another before I came across to them and were launched into half-embarrassment, half-laughing explanations, which were to be interrupted and made still more confused by my introduction, and then broken off altogether by our being joined by a middle-aged woman who came out of the shop, accompanied by 2 olive-skinned, foreign-looking little girls of 12 and 14 or so. Olive-skinned, not brown boys anymore. Now it's olive-skinned foreign girls. Ugh. We stood in a knot on the pavement. Everybody talked at once, including the little boy, whose theme was simply and insistently tea. However, it emerged that the middle-aged lady was Miss Hancock, and she was Daphne's temporary employer. And little Bobby was her son, and the two girls of a friend staying with the Hancocks for the school holidays. While Piers did most of the talking on our side, I naturally observed Daphne Hazel, the quarry, so to speak, of our wild goose chase. She was very much the pleasant, active-looking girl I had pictured. Just the girl who could have enjoyed such energetic gambles, and she had described. Still, what struck me, and what couldn't have been described in her first-person story, was her good looks. Oh, God, I admired in particular the most attractive combination of natural tones, a shining softness of pale hair, an intense blue of the eyes, and a clarity of complexion where the blood brightened and the light brown tan of summer. That she recognized the satisfying harmony of those colors herself was indicated, I thought, by her having refrained from intruding on them any smear of synthetic carmine. Miss Hancock made the amiable suggestion that we should go back with them for tea. So off we went on foot. Oh, the house, it appeared, was not far out of town. Piers, Daphne, and the little boy walked in front with Miss Hancock, and the two little girls and I followed on the heels. I was giving Miss Hancock a rather cautious account of our walk. "Oh, Ringstones Hall," she said. "Daphne and my husband can tell you a story about Ringstones Hall." I hesitated to ask because I was not sure how much she knew about Daphne's story, but then, from what Daphne was saying to Piers, I grasped there wasn't much secret about it. Daphne's voice expressed great surprise. "But didn't you get my letter?" "No," said Piers. "There was no letter." "But I wrote," she protested, and explained it all. "I sent the letter off first, because I remember thinking when I was wrapping up the book how silly, because I could have put the letter inside the book and saved 2 pence a penny. But I'd rather written the letter first. I licked the envelope, and I put the stamp on it and gave it to Bobby to post without thinking." She stopped suddenly, and we all stopped. She looked at Bobby, a child, I suppose, of some 9 or 10 years, with consternation in her face. Bobby," she cried, "you did post that letter I gave you on Monday, didn't you?" The child put his guard on with all his natural— I'm sorry, my wife is jiggling her tits in front of me— with all his natural mistrust of adults, roused by his concentration of attention, and tried to divert it by skipping the direct question with the brief— now she's doing a weird rhythmic dance— with a nod, and immediately seeking to interest us in a project of which he seemed to have information. To make the green sheep car buses extend to the Sir Stein's Head, I sympathized with this gallant but hopeless attempt to create a diversion. A few more years would teach him that there's nothing so pernicious as a woman intent on fixing responsibility for a lapse. And she's still dancing. Reluctantly, therefore, he abandoned the bus subject and admitted that he had posted the letter. "Yes, but when?" Daphne persisted. "Yesterday," came the sorry confession. Daphne gasped, "Oh, Bobby!" And she looked up at us, blushing with comical guilt. "I forgot it on Monday, but I remembered it yesterday morning, and I did the post all right," Bobby volunteered, finding an explanation easier after the admission of the fact. I don't think Piers wanted to catch my eye just then, and the thought of the postman delivering the simple solution of all the mystery Piers had elaborated, probably at the very moment when he stood staring with a wild surmise at the mournful solitude of Ringstones Hall, is all too much for me. My laughter puzzled Miss Hancock, and it made Daphne's warm cheeks glow the brighter. "So that's why you came," she said, as the full enormity of the misunderstanding sank in. "And you've been all that way to Ringstones. Oh, dear, what a ass I was. But I can explain it all. I was just going to suggest that you might explain it over tea," said Miss Hancock pleasantly. "Shall we go along?" "Well, why don't we go down to the basement, which is totally normal and not creepy at all. It's fine. It's a place I've made for teens, and I'll bring the coffee machine down. We can have some coffee, and then we'll learn about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House." Oh, there you are. Oh, you made it. Why don't you take a seat here in this super cool room I'm making for teens to hang out in? Yeah, there's still a lot of dripping water. It's kind of moist down here. It's a leak, and there's a little mold, but otherwise it's fine. Why don't you take a seat? Oh, it looks like your coffee is finished. You know what happens when your coffee's finished? You can't be here anymore. So, why don't I make you another espresso? Let me get this started. There we go. We'll just get that started right there. Because the thing is, if you don't have if you don't got any coffee in that cup, you can't fucking be here anymore. With that, thanks for coming here down into my basement where I can tell you about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. And I'll let you know about the latest book called Percy Jackson Mad Libs by Lee Olson. Hold on, let me just get the milk going here for a second before I read this. Yep. There we go, come on. All right, let's boil it up. There we go. Percy Jackson Mad Libs by Lee Olson. You want to learn about this book? Sure you do. The book description? A Mad Libs featuring stories inspired by Rick Riordan's best-selling YA series Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So, that's it. Oh, they got product details with the ISBN number. Okay, well, that's it. So that's Percy Jackson's Mad Libs by Lee Olson. Age ranges from 8 to 12 years. That's got to be fun for kids. It's got a paperback for $6.99. Available on December 2nd of this year. You can get it from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books, Amelia, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's Target, and, hold on. We're almost done here for a second. Okay, the milk's almost done. And Walmart. Hold on. I didn't do it right. Walmart! Oh, something's happening to the voice. I sounded very East Coast there for a second. I hope that doesn't come up later in the show. Let me just finish milking, getting this milk, the steam with the milk. You know what? Why don't you go back upstairs and I'll bring your latte up to you up there, and I'll see you upstairs. Well, okay, now we're back. Why don't you get yourself settled? And don't play with that. That's not for you. Stop. You come to my house. Did you got your coffee? Because if you're not drinking coffee, you can't stay here. And it always costs $9. Hold on a sec.
Oh, that feels so much better. Mrs. Hancock's husband, she told me before we reached the house, was a doctor with his practice in Stein's Head. The two young girls were the daughters of an Egyptian doctor, a friend of Dr. Hancock, who, it seems, had spent most of the war in Egypt. They were at school in England and had been spending the summer holiday with the Hancocks. Mrs. Hancock had thought it would be a good idea to get someone to come for the summer who could both help to look after the children and give them some tuition in English. It so happened that Dr. Hancock had an old friend who was a lecturer at Tarleton College, and he had written to her on the chance that the job might interest one of the Tarleton girls. The Egyptian girls, Farida and Naima, were shy. They spoke English quite well, but only giggled when I spoke to them in Arabic. That, perhaps, is scarcely to be wondered at. I only know classical Arabic, which I've no doubt I speak with a Cambridge accent, and I have very little idea what barbarous corruptions may pass for Arabic in the mouths of present-day Egyptians. But here, at any rate, I thought, was another of Daphne's sources. The Naima's name solved the puzzle of the Ain. The Hancock's house was a big one, with a spacious garden and a fine view of the moorland hills. Dr. Hancock, who was waiting for us to begin tea, was a brisk, smart, jovial, gray-haired little man who could well have been the original of Daphne's Dr. Ravlin. I was interested in his books, which filled many shelves around the big sitting room where we had tea. He was not long in inquiring what we were reading at Cambridge, and soon he and I were well away on the subject of Oriental languages. It's so warm. He seemed to have a fair command of colloquial Egyptian and some acquaintance with the written language. The little girls understood his Arabic all right and talked it back at him, and I'm afraid that in the interest of tracking down the classical origin of their dialect forms, I rather forgot about Daphne's story. Incidentally, though, I had noticed that the doctor's library covered a pretty wide range, and among all sorts of scientific books, there were a good few on anthropology and archaeology, including an abridged edition of The Golden Bough and several of Elliott Smith's and Perry's work. Ooh, Elliott Smith, like the singer.
Like the singer.
Daphne did not begin to explain her story until the children had slipped away to play, and then she seemed to have such difficulty in beginning that Dr. Hancock took the task on for her. He had laughed delightedly when he heard that we had actually gone to Ringstones Hall expecting to find her there. "I know Ringstones well enough," he said. "I was born and brought up in this district. It was a fine place once upon a time. My father was in practice in Knightsbridge when he was a young man, and he used to go and visit at Ringstones. I've heard him tell how he used to drive up to Blagill and over the moor in his dog cart to dine with old Dr. Ravlin. He was Doctor of Divinity, not medicine, just like my husband's tits. And back again in the pitch dark night with a skin full of port wine and a head full of tales about pixies and hobgoblins and ancient Britons and Romans and Picts and I don't know what. Old Ravlin was an antiquarian and a folklorist, and he and my father used to go at it hammer and tongs about the local legends which my father, being brought up on scientific principles, would try to natural origins for, while old Ravlin, it seems, was all for the supernatural. That was before I was born. Even in those days, a place like Ringstones cost a lot to maintain, and I suppose old Ravlin found it too much for his means. At any rate, he shut the place up and went abroad and died abroad. It passed to his heir, a grandnephew, I believe, who was in the Indian Army. Captain Wrightson, he was called. There was a family of Wrightsons at Knightsbridge. I used to stare at their memorial tablets in the parish church on Sundays when I was a boy, but they've all died out long since. This Captain Wrightson's was not known here. Whether he ever came and looked at the old place, I don't quite know. It's likely enough that he had the idea of settling at Ringstones when he retired from the army, but that never came about. The house was left with a couple of caretakers in it, a man and his wife that Wrightson set up from London, and George Idenden's father at Blagill rented the park for grazing. Then Captain Wrightson was killed, broke his neck in a riding accident. I remember hearing of that. I suppose I should be 19 or 20 at the time. It was not long before my father died. Captain Wrightson had no children. I suppose his executors must have tried. Huh?
What was that word?
I can't fucking hear you. Captain Wrightson had no children. I suppose his executors must have tried to sell the place as it stood, but no one would buy so remote an old place as that. It's too isolated and inconvenient for anyone nowadays. I say nowadays, but it's 30 years since. Still, even then, people wanted something a bit more modern than Ringstones. Bit by bit, they sold what was saleable. The furniture and all the old paneling and woodwork. And in the end, the Idendens bought the place for grazing land and some shooting syndicate which has since gone bust through the moor. Some of the stuff was bought up locally. The Kuwait chest and the hall came from there, and we have a few other bits of things. Well, that was the state of the place when I began to practice here in Stainshead 20 years ago. There used to be quite a good footpath over the moor from here to Blagill, and sometimes I used to go for a walk that way and have a good look at Ringstones. Daphne now chimed in. I'd heard all about Ringstones, you see, from Dr. Hancock. It sounded an interesting place, and I thought I should like to see it. So we went, said Dr. Hancock. He looked at Piers and me with an inquiring lift of his brows. I suppose that's the adventure she told you about. Daphne looked at us all uncomfortably. Oh, it's getting sexy. Well, no, she began, but Piers helped her out by asking the doctor to give us his version of their trip to Ringstones first. The doctor looked rather surprised, but then, quickly grasping that this was more complicated than he had thought, gave us a short and precise account of their walk. When was it, he said. About 4 weeks ago? Yes. My wife was taking the children off to her sister's in sheep car for the day. It was Sunday. Daphne and I decided we would walk over the moor, have a look at Ringstones, and come back by the evening bus from Blackgill. I hadn't been over for years before then, and I found that the path had got so overgrown that it was a hard job to follow it. In fact, though I couldn't very well admit it at the time, I got well and truly lost on my native heath. However, I knew that if we only kept on long enough, I should see something that I knew, and Daphne's a bonny walker, so after some hard going over the heather and mosses, we did in the end sight the standing stones, the Ringstones, you know, that this place is called after. That was fine. No danger of going wrong from there. But, just as we were getting to them, Daphne put her foot in a hole and came an awful cropper. When I picked her up, I found she'd sprained an ankle and cut her left wrist quite deeply by coming down on her hands among the stiff heather stalks. It was rather a fix. The day had turned very dull. I thought we were likely to have a thunderstorm. There's no shelter at all up there. Well, of course, you know that. There was no question of her being able to walk at Blackgill with that ankle. And though, of course, I gallantly offered to carry her the remaining 4 miles, she made such objections to that I didn't. "Yes, I could see you carrying my 9 stone all that way," cried Daphne. "Pooh," said the little doctor. "I'd have tossed you over my shoulder like a roll of bedding. It was your dignity I was thinking about." Well, the only thing was to get Daphne down to the hall where she'd be sheltered a bit if it did rain, while I went off to Blackgill to find some transport. I'm afraid we didn't improve the ankle getting down the hill, and it caused Daphne great pain. However, we got there. The door was open. I settled Daphne down on the bottom stair in front of the front hall and got some water and bathed and bandaged her ankle and wrist with our handkerchiefs and then set off for Blackgill as hard as I could go. Just fancy, Mrs. Hancock appealed to us, leaving the poor girl all alone in that lonely old place, miles from anywhere, and all the tales you'd been telling her about the Polish girl, too. "What had that to do with it?" demanded the doctor. "Something, I think," said Piers, looking at Daphne, who, with brilliant eyes, was making the best of her embarrassment. "I should like to hear about her." "All right," said Dr. Hancock. "As near as I can, I'll tell you. It happened while I was away in the army." Mrs. Hancock interposed. "I can tell that story better than you. I was there at the time. This is like being at a dinner with my family. My God, everyone's talking over each other and saying the exact same thing over and over and over. Christ. Some people called Roebuck, who live at Towngate End, took on a Polish maid in the last year of the war. It's my belief that the girl wasn't all there. She used to drive poor Mrs. Roebuck to distraction. She never understood a word the girl said, and the girl, I expect, never understood anything they said to her. She was a fine-looking girl as far as figure went, but I always thought there was something wandering in her eyes. Well, one afternoon, she went out for a walk and didn't come back. Burp. She hadn't turned up by the time it was dark, and Mrs. Roebuck rang me up and asked what she ought to do. She was imagining all sorts of things except the obvious one, which, to my mind, was that Katya, that was the girl's name, had hopped off to Nettleworth, where the Polish troops were then. Well, she kept ringing me up at intervals until midnight, getting more and more worried. She telephoned the Polish camp, and Katya wasn't there, and she telephoned the hospital, and she telephoned the police, and she couldn't hear a word of the last. Finally, I persuaded her to leave it with the police sergeant here and go to bed. However, before 8 o'clock the next morning, she rings me up in a great agitation and says she's had a phone call from the Idendens at Blackgill and they found Katya. Would I take her over in the car to collect her? I was doing WVS work then, so off we went, Mrs. Roebuck and I, to Blackgill. There was Katya in the Idendens kitchen looking as wild as a witch, old George grinning all over his face, young Joe looking very sheepish, and young Joe's missus not looking at all pleased. Ooh, what did they do to Katya? Katya was wearing some of Mrs. Idenden's things, and when we asked her where her own were, there was a certain amount of embarrassment. But young Joe told me that the whole tale next time he came into Stainshead. It appears he'd gone up on his pony early that morning to look after some bullocks they had in Ringstones Park. On his way back, he saw something white lying between those standing stones. Thinking it was a sheep that was sick, he rode over and then he saw that it was a girl, stark naked, and he said he thought at first dead. But just as he came up, she sat up, gave one shriek and flew at him and clung to him for dear life. Poor Joe, he sawed all that he could think of for a bit and said that it was a good job there was nobody else about. However, he did disentangle himself and gave her his coat, tried to tell her to stay there while he went to go get his wife to bring her something to put on. But Katya wasn't having that. He said that she was terrified and he could make nothing of her. So, little as he liked the job, he put her on the pony and led her down to the farm and handed her over to his wife. He hadn't any idea who she was, but his wife, it seems, had heard that the Roebucks had a Polish maid, and this seemed to be a foreigner. She rang Mrs. Roebuck up. What the fuck?
I know. It's old books. They're written weird.
Well, of course, we tried to get out of Katya what had happened, but she'd lost whatever wit she had ever had by then. She never had much English, and the most I could understand from her was that she'd met some people she called little men, and they'd played tricks on her and taken her clothes and kept her up all night at the old hall. She had obviously had a bad fright of some sort, but she didn't seem to have much bodily harm, except for a lot of bruises, which aren't bodily harm. I suppose she'd got through tumbling about the hillside in her birthday suit. The fact that she had been down to the hall was proved when Joe Idenden, a day or two later, turned up with her clothes. He'd found them somewhere among the old buildings belonging to the hall. Katya, of course, was quite barmy. The Roebucks couldn't keep her, and so they asked the Poles to collect her. But, bless my soul, they'd scarcely arranged with the Polish doctor at the camp to come and fetch her when off she flitted again. And this time, Bert, they never did find her, though they got the police and the Home Guard and the Polish troops and the Boy Scouts and everybody in 3 parishes scouring the moors for days. If she ever was found, it wasn't in this neighborhood, and nobody here has heard tell of her from that day to this. And broke in the doctor, hardly waiting for his wife to finish, you wouldn't believe it in these days of popular science and the pictures, but somebody dropped a dark hint about Durgar, and somebody else said, well, the stone circle always had been reckoned an uncanny place. The Durgar, we asked, another fucking location? Yes. I shouldn't have thought there was anybody left in Northumberland who knew the name outside a book, but it's odd how these places do linger underneath. The Durgar's supposed to be the wild man of the moor. Oh, it's a person who hunts people down and carries them off underground. I haven't heard this name mentioned since I was so high, and my grandmother used to tell me fairy tales. Oh, that, said Mrs. Hancock. That's all a lot of silly nonsense. Somebody just said that for a joke. What I was meaning was that I shouldn't have been able to help think of that loony flitting about the place. Piers wrinkled his brows. And you'd heard about this before you went to Ringstones, he asked Daphne. Yes, she said, but I wasn't thinking about it particularly. I didn't mind being left alone in the old hall. It was broad daylight after all, and my ankle was hurting far too much for me to worry about anything else. Yes, now, but let me finish the facts, said Dr. Hancock. I got down to Blaggle, and by good luck I caught Joe Idenden just as he was going out. I got him to yoke out the old pony trap and come back with me at once. I suppose, all told, I was away from Daphne about 2.5 hours. When Joe and I got back, she was lying on the floor in a dead faint. I brought her round and we got her into the trap, but she was in very distressed condition and I was puzzled because the effect didn't seem altogether due to shock from the sprain, and there hadn't been all that loss of blood from the laceration in her wrist. Joe was very good. After I had given Daphne some treatment at this place, he drove us all the way back here. I never thought about his adventure with the Polish girl then, but I'll bet he did. Daphne was a good deal better when we got home. We put her to bed, and apart from the sprain and rather low temperature and slow pulse, her condition was normal. By next morning, she was quite well in herself. There now, those are the facts. I see, said Piers, but you've missed out one, haven't you? What? Asked Daphne quickly. You had lost your watch, hadn't you? Yes, she said, that's perfectly true. The strap had broken. I put it in my coat pocket. There's shallow little pockets, and somewhere it must have fallen out. Perhaps when I fell down. I didn't miss it until Dr. Hancock had left me, though. Well, I said, but what did happen? I'm afraid this inquest was rather hard on Daphne. She looked very uncomfortable, and though she was obviously trying not to be self-conscious about it, I'm sure she was heartily wishing she had never obeyed the impulse to send that wretched exercise book to Piers. I don't really know how to explain this, she said, as much to Dr. and Mrs. Hancock as to Piers and me. You know I amused myself while it's getting sexy again, while I had to stay indoors with the sprain by scribbling in an exercise book. I didn't know you what I'd written because, well, it seemed such nonsense when it was written down. I just couldn't believe it myself, and yet I felt I simply had to write it all down. I suppose, having written it, I ought to have kept it to myself, but something I really don't know what. I mean, like you do with a dream, I wanted to tell it. And Piers knows me, and so, on the spur of the moment, I read a letter, saying how I had come to write it, then parceled the thing up and sent it off. I never dreamed, of course, that Bobby hadn't posted the letter. You must have wondered what on earth it was when you got the book without any explanation. But, I mean, how could I have imagined you'd go off to Ringstones to look for me? Never mind, I said comfortingly. We enjoyed it. I wouldn't have missed that bog hole for worlds. If there is a bog hole anywhere within reach, you never do miss it, retorted Piers. Ha ha! That was my nickname in college, bog holes. But still, what I should like to know is where you think the story came from. I mean, how did it happen in your mind? I must send it back so that you can read it, he said to Hancock's, if Daphne doesn't mind. Daphne hesitated. Well, she said, frowning a little and scraping the crumbs on the cloth together with her finger. Well, it was sort of a dream, or a lot of dreams. I know that sounds impossible. I mean, one couldn't normally dream all that, all those conversations and so on. It's frightfully difficult to express this, but you yourself must have had a dream something like that at some time. I mean, one where you wake up, and although you can only remember clearly one or two incidents, or one or two sentences that someone had said in your dream, yet you have the strongest feeling that there was a tremendous amount more that you just fail to remember, something that's there, and yet just eludes your grasp. The tail of the mouse disappearing down the hole, I said. Yes, I've sometimes had that feeling, after a dream. Well, she said, this was like that, but somehow a much stronger feeling and such a vivid sense of reality that really, while I was writing it down, I did seem to be recollecting actual facts. As soon as I put pen to paper, the whole thing came pouring back. I knew that all the talk of Dr. Ravlin's that I dreamed must have been like that. And I knew I must have seen a park just like that, and that the girls and Norman must have done just what they did so. I mean, I don't say that I remembered all the talk word for word, but I woke up with sentences perfectly clear in my mind, and I knew that if so-and-so had been said, then all the other must have led up to it. I thought I understood what she was trying to say, and Piers supported her by telling us that once before his tripos, he had woken up in the morning convinced that he had composed a complete series of answers to a paper on 17th century drama in his sleep. The doctor was interested. When did the dreams begin, he asked Daphne. Slurp. That's one of the funniest things about it, she said. I can't quite decide. I know that for a time after you left me in the hall there at Ringstones, I didn't think much about anything very much except the pain in my ankle and my wrist and how I was to get back. Though, at the same time, I was worrying about my watch. It's only a cheap one, but I wish I hadn't lost it. Then I remember feeling cold, which was odd because the day was close and sultry. I think I did get a bit frightened then. I began to feel that the place was awfully still and lonely, though there were faint and little noises rustling about in some of the rooms, and quite suddenly, I remember, I heard some people, children they sounded like, laughing and calling to each other outside. I was absolutely convinced I heard them. I just couldn't catch the words, but they were voices. I wasn't frightened simply because they were so real. I was thinking more of the shock they were going to get if they came inside and saw me sitting there at the foot of the stairs. The jackdaws, I suggested. They can sound very human. They and the noise of the beck. I've once or twice been convinced myself when we've been camping near a hill stream that someone was talking close by and had to get up to assure myself it was only the water. Yes, said Daphne doubtfully. Yes, I suppose that must have been it. But then someone came down the stairs behind me and touched me at the back of the neck, and then I fainted. What? We all shouted together. Down the stairs? There aren't any stairs. Daphne looked really startled. Aren't there? She asked incredulously. But I sat on them. That's where you made me sit down while you bandaged my ankle, isn't it? She turned to Dr. Hancock. The doctor looked at her very cleanly. You sat on the bottom step, he said, but that's all there was to sit on. The rest of the stairs were taken out long ago. Didn't you notice when we went in? Well, no, perhaps you wouldn't. I suppose that ankle was giving you enough pain to distract your mind from your surroundings at that moment. That's rather an interesting example of the power of suggestion. You were sitting on a stair with your back to where the rest of the stairs ought to be, and even though you can perhaps feel that there's nothing behind you, yet your subconscious mind makes the assumption that the rest of the stairs are there. But I should say that in recalling what happened, you have involuntarily transposed two events. You fainted first, the fatigue and shock could account for that, and after a partial recovery of consciousness, there was this hallucination of hearing footsteps and being touched.
So tedious.
There may even have been a slight delirium, though. At the time, the injury didn't seem to me sufficient. But you never know. It's not like I'm a doctor or anything. I once saw a hefty Egyptian fella pass clean out from a subcutaneous injection. Slurp.
The Egyptian fellow.
You know, Daphne resumed, I really did think that there were stairs there. I can't quite picture the hall without them. I can see now, I think, that all my dreams about the place were pieced together from what you told me before, not from what I actually saw there. I don't think I was quite conscious any of the time from that faint I did until waking up the next morning at bed here. At any rate, I have no clear idea at all of being put into the trap and brought back. Perhaps, I don't know, some disjointed kind of impression of turning wheels and a whip cracking. But the next morning, although I woke up feeling all right except that my ankle hurt, I was absolutely certain that I had spent the whole time from the faint in one tremendous crowded dream, and that, if I tried, I could recollect the whole of it in perfect detail. And, well, that conviction was so strong that I hobbled over to my chest of drawers and got out that new exercise book and my fountain pen and began to scribble it all down. She sat back and looked around at us. I should like to see this production, said the doctor. It's quite a feat to write down a dream, but it isn't by any means impossible. What a terrible doctor. After all, reason and imagination step in to fill in the gaps between the genuinely recollected incidents of the dream. The Neo-Rosicrucians make a practice of it. I've seen some of their records of dreams. Astonishing. Farragos. It's called confabulation. I nodded. I had seen some too. It seems to me, I said, feeling rather pleased that my simple explanation of the story as an exercise in fiction had, after all, been a bit nearer to the mark than Piers's mystery mongering. It seems to me that you had all the elements of the story, or dream, that you wrote already supplied to you here, from Dr. Hancock's stories of Dr. Ravlin's talks with his father, from the presence of these two little Egyptian girls, and the little boy. Most of the matter of Dr. Ravlin's archaeological ramblings might be the dream reproductions of bits you had to read in some of these books here. If you've dipped into them. Daphne admitted she had. If pain can start you dreaming, I suppose it might, perhaps, underlying feelings of anxiety, I mean about your watch and getting home, might be expressed in a kind of crazy story in which physical exertion and being held a prisoner were the main themes. Like half the books I read. Both Piers and the doctor opened their mouths, were prepared to tear my theory of dreams to tatters. But I fended them off until I had got out something else that interested me in the story as a story.
Holding your index finger.
Half a tick before you Freudians charge, I said. You Freudian fucks. Slurp, just let me say that I can understand your dreaming all that, even the dream within the dream. I have a dim memory of double dreams myself, but there's one of your fancies I should like to know the origin of. This sort of gladiator school, not that the general idea of it is strange. God knows I still occasionally dream about the agonies of being chased around the gym at my own school. Ooh, sexy again. But I mean the chariots. I can see it might be an expression of that feeling you sometimes have in a dream of being fastened to something you would have to haul along. Something that, holds you back when you want to speed away. But I should like to know where you got the actual picture of girls drawing chariots. There's something I seem to remember in an Elizabethan play about pampered jades of Asia. And there's that prince of Taig Jin in Marco Polo who had his slave girls draw him about the palace grounds in a little light vehicle made for the purpose.
Gross.
There's even a doubtfully authenticated story of the Indian Mutiny, which relates to a son of the Mughal emperor when the mutineers took Delhi, had some of the English women captives stripped and harnessed to his carriage. But I wonder what you had been reading.
Christ.
Okay, that's a very specific type of porn. Daphne grins. Well, I never heard about the Indian Mutiny, and I'm ashamed to say I've never read Marco Polo. I do know a bit from the Tamburlaine, but really, I can't think where I've read about those chariots. They were just there, quite an unusual feature of the games. It was just that I felt that if once they got me strapped up to that pole, she rounded her shoulders and seemed to shrink from a present physical feat. Well, I said, I suppose it just remains an unexplained quirk of the dreaming fancy then. But still, the inspiration, so to speak, seems to me a bit inadequate. I saw that coach house place you mentioned, and I'm dashed if my subconscious or imagination or whatnot would ever have fabricated a gleaming chariot out of a few old bike wheels and bits of moldy trap harness. Daphne began to object to something, but Piers interrupted her. That reminds me, he exclaimed. He fished something out of his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. That your watch? He asked. He's had the thing in his pocket the whole goddamn time they've been talking about this fucking watch. Daphne picked it up. Yes, it is. But where did you find it? I noticed again how extraordinarily brilliant her eyes became when she was excited. Their blue light held my attention, so as she stared at Piers, that perhaps I was slow to understand why the warm color of her brow and cheeks, which had been so attractive a setting for the eye's brilliance, had now turned dull and cold. The little doctor took the watch from her, wound it up, shook it, and held it to his ear. He gave an exclamation of a pleased surprise. Well, that's none the worse. Anyway, it's going. He began to set it by the clock on the mantelpiece. Daphne's eyes were still fixed on Piers. Where did you find it? She asked again, but her voice was almost a whisper. Why, in that coach house in the stable yard, said Piers, looking at her intently. Dr. Hancock jerked up his head. Stable yard, he exclaimed. You couldn't. Daphne never went near the stables. She couldn't have done. Could you? Daphne did not speak. I suddenly realized the cause of that peculiar brightness in her eyes, and I was shocked to see how far behind Piers I had been in understanding the depth of her distress. She held out both of her hands, not to take the watch, but with a curious gesture of surrender, as if offering the hands and wrists themselves to someone. I saw a newly healed cut on the inside of her left wrist, plain against the sun-browned skin. She seemed to offer her wrists a moment and then, yielding to an unknown compulsion, reluctantly turned down her palms, curling her fingers around something invisible to us. No one spoke. I think we were all looking with a slowly rising fear at those two drooping hands, so helplessly waiting there. Then, Piers bent swiftly across the table and seized both of her hands in his, gripping them hard. "Hold on," he said. "The watch ticks. Our time." The doctor did arrive in time, you know. He did arrive.
Oh, well, it looks like this is the end of the book. My voice is bad, and I sound Midwestern again. Oh, thank God. Why don't we go to the smoking room and talk about what the hell we just read?
Oh no, I gotta stop smoking menthols. I sound East Coast again. Okay, so, we learned that, oh, god damn it, my wife's birds. Shut up. We've learned that Dr. Doodoo, is treating, Dinkledurr for confabulation? She's maybe been kidnapped by imps to become a sex slave for elves. I guess we'll find out more in the next act, what may or may not be all a dream. Like Dallas, the soap opera from the early 80s. Yeah, deep cut. Anyway, thanks for joining us. Oh my fuck, get out of my fucking hair! Anyway, they're flying closer and closer every time. They're gonna get me someday. They watch me with their beady little eyes. We'll see you next time here at, oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people, not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com. Don't bother looking for us on social media because we've given it all up after the election with how evil everyone is from Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I shut it all down. But you can find us on Blue Sky, nuzzlehouse.bsky.com. I don't know. We got a Christmas album on our website, which we should do. Everyone should do when they get married, make a Christmas album. We got Just Stay in the Curious Mind, where we make paranormal smut, Masterpiece Auditorium review books, and Two Things, One Cup with Elton from Elton Reads a Book a Week. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly, glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdlinger or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.